Welcome to the Agilist Aspire and Achieve in Your Agile Career video podcast series. This series is all about helping you grow, thrive, and make an impact in your career and the community with an Agile mindset. Whether you're just starting out or you're an experienced practitioner, we're here to bring you inspiring stories, actionable advice, and meaningful conversations that will help you navigate and excel in your Agile career, meeting some amazing mentors along the way. Get ready to aspire, achieve, and thrive in the next step in your journey.
All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whenever you guys are watching this. We're on our next episode of the Aspire and Achieve as an Agilist podcast series. I'm your host, Emily Lint, and today we are chatting with Stephanie Ockerman. How are you doing today, Stephanie?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Of course. How's the weather in Costa Rica?
Well, it's actually a little bit rainy. It's rainy season right now, but it's just a nice little soft drizzle, which also means it's not horribly hot and unbearable. So it's quite pleasant actually, even though it's sprinkling.
Oh, that's good. I mean, I'd rather it be a little bit sprinkling in Costa Rica than like here in Seattle, which is sprinkling all the time, you know?
Yeah.
Fun. So why don't you introduce yourself to the audience today and why you're going to be talking to us about certifications, kind of demystifying certifications.
Yeah, absolutely. So I probably should have looked this up in advance. I have been working kind of in what is known as kind of the Agile space, working with product teams to navigate the uncertainty, the complexities, the unpredictability, be able to respond to change for probably over a decade now. And before that, I actually started my career in project management, in IT project management, and kind of moving into like release management and things like that. And at a certain point, I realized I wanted to make that career transition. And so what I do today is I founded the company Agile Socks and really focus on business agility enablement and combining that with growing our team dynamics, right? Improving how teams are able to be empowered, to be capable, to be inspired, and more collaborative, leading to more innovation. And then the third piece of that, also focusing around growing our leadership capacity. So there's the business agility, the team dynamics, and the leadership capacity. And the leadership capacity piece is really what I've been leaning into over the last few years, because I realized it was a lot of what was holding individuals and teams back from growing is, and I don't just mean leadership as in a job title or position of authority, it's more that, you know, who I am and how I show up and my alignment and kind of that inside out type of leadership, then also kind of looking at then how do you use positional authority. And so needing to grow our leadership capacity is really what it takes in this day and age to actually enable the benefits of business agility, to be responsive to change, to be innovative, to focus on value, to work in short experiments, to learn quickly. And so kind of working to combine all three of those pieces to enable success.
Oh, wonderful. Man, that's quite an intro. And you went into too how to start and find your Agile career. So I won't jump into that question. What are you also like certified in teaching or in training? What have been kind of your focus in that space?
Yeah, so I am a licensed Scrum.org professional Scrum Trainer. Part of that origin story, I guess I'll call it, is when I first discovered agility, kind of the first trainings that I went to were the Scrum.org courses, and I was blown away by how impactful they were. You know, it wasn't just like, hey, we're gonna like lecture you and give you these tools and concepts. And it wasn't, hey, we're doing fun activities. It was, yeah, it's interactive, but it's going to challenge everything you think you know in ways that, you know, you really can't forget it. And you kind of start to think about like, wow, I have been doing that. What do I really believe? Oh, this is going to be challenging. Am I willing to step up to that challenge and start to actually leverage the knowledge and skills? So I was really affected by my own experiences in the Scrum.org curriculum. And so kind of fast forward a bit after I'd had several years of experience, I had already been delivering training in a different context and loved the idea of training. And so once I had the experience, I knew I wanted to go down the path of becoming a licensed Scrum.org professional Scrum trainer. And so I teach the majority of their suite of training offerings as my certification. I have also gone down the path, and this is where I'm sure we'll get into this. I am not certified, but I have gone down the path of coactive coaching. So attending the full 5-course series of coactive coaching, as well as the ORSC 5-course series around organization and relationship systems coaching. And then also down the leadership path of coactive leadership. They have a 10-month program that for me turned into 3 years, thanks to the pandemic, of leadership capacity and leadership growth. So those are kind of the key things that really inform the work I do and how I show up, and probably a lot of what we're going to talk about here.
Do you sleep?
I do.
Want to make sure. Okay, all right, great, good,
well,
cool.
It's actually a good point you're making is this wasn't something I did in a couple years, right? Like this is from the start of my career, this iterative, incremental, okay, what do I think I need next? Where do I need to grow? And what do I have the capacity for? And so this is over the course of several years of my career getting to that point.
Okay, great. So audience, don't judge yourself on that of like, oh man, like how did you do all that? You know, definitely a rock star for sure, but don't judge yourself on that too much. So what have you observed then about the role of career development in Agile over the years then, you know, in those, because especially you're talking about all these different transitions that you were making in ways that you were expanding. What have you observed personally?
Yeah, it's been it's interesting to reflect back on it. I have seen a lot. One of the things I'll say is that I was very lucky early in my career to be both surrounded by mentors in the space who had more experience than me, and not just the experience of knowing Agile practices and frameworks and tools, but they were good leaders, right? And they were good mentors, and they had other skills like facilitation and teaching and coaching, and just being able to identify root causes and lead conversations in ways that kind of brought groups together. So I was really surrounded by a lot of great people that I admired and paid attention to, like, wow, I want to be able to do that. Like, what are they doing? Just kind of that curiosity. And then when I moved more specifically into Scrum training and also training regarding product ownership and other complementary practices, going into trainings around developing my facilitation skills, developing my coaching skills. What I've started to notice over time is that there has been more and more training created and more certifications created, and a little less mentoring and a little less coaching, like like getting coached, or just being in thought leadership circles. And so, that's just my experience. It doesn't mean those things are not out there and aren't available. I'm sure they're happening in some spaces. But there does seem to be more of an emphasis now on consuming knowledge and learning over truly growing our capabilities and skills and our wisdom, not just knowing stuff, but the wisdom is kind of what guides, like which practices or frameworks or do I think are going to be useful in this scenario, right? Like, and there's this kind of urgency of learning as much as possible and not as much emphasis on the practice, and getting that type of experience. I also understand why that happens. I think it's the chicken and the egg scenario of organizations, saying we want to be agile, we're going to buy agility. And so one of the things I do caution people around as they are trying to maybe shift a career in this direction or grow their career in this direction is to pay attention to, what do job descriptions say? right? Are they really enforcing plan-driven, you know, non-empirical ways of working, controlling, managing, or are they, does it seem like they understand what empiricism means, what it means to be value driven? Do they understand the essence of whether it's Scrum Master, whether it is, an agility lead, whatever job titles they're using, product owner, product manager, right? When you look at the job descriptions, and when you're having interviews, right? Like treat that as the opportunity to interview them and understand, like, are they really moving in this direction? So I would say those are kind of the two things I've noticed is one, just that consumption of, hey, more training, more certifications, more knowledge, and then the second piece being organizations kind of installing Agile, trying to kind of buy an Agile transformation without investing in doing the actual work that involves changing everything. It to some degree, not changing everything overnight, right? Still this emergent process that involves the people doing the work, being involved in those decisions and finding that way forward. So kind of those two things, I think, have made it honestly a tough market, a tough place to be growing your career. And so I think that speaks to one of the big reasons the series that you're doing is so important.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you for kind of summarizing, those 2 points and then doing a toss out to the series here is like kind of closing some of the gap around like mentorship and things like that to kind of connect people together. I think in addition to some of the notes that you had around organizations and thinking about certifications and just like buying Agile, and then when you're in the interviews, we're going to be doing an episode on, good Agile interviews. How do I interview for Agilist and how do I be interviewed as an Agilist? Part of that also being like, I hear it all the time from internal folks of like, well, we're doing Agile, but we're not really doing Agile. And I'm like, okay, put a nickel in the jar every time I've heard that, because that's the case, is that you're not going to see people doing things outside right in the book, and if you're doing Scrum training, you teach like the best practices, but people are going to add, take away, find best ways to do it for themselves. And so, kind of figuring out like there's things in my head that I think about and I go like when I look at a job description, I go, does this align with the things that I'm willing to flex on? Where are the ways, like, for example, I'm fine with working with an organization that's hybrid between projects and products, because I know that transition, I understand it, I get the purpose of why you might have both for a short amount of time, or even why you might just continue to have both, right? But some people are like, oh my God, no, like product only organization, or like I can't work in a place that has that like hybrid transition, because that doesn't match up with their values or the knowledge that they have, right? So kind of figuring those things out for yourself too.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so you kind of got started on the next question that I had for you, but getting into kind of the meat of the conversation, the meat of our content today. So how do you feel like most Agilists or most people really start out that certification journey? We can use maybe Scrum training as an example. And how do you kind of wish people started their certification journey?
Oh, great way to word that question. So I see people come to Scrum training in a couple different ways. One is they really just want to make a transition. They're like, hey, like I see this thing happening in, the market, and I feel like I want to become a Scrum Master, or I want to work in a Scrum team or a product team, an Agile team. And so they're trying to get the baseline knowledge. So they come to a Scrum training and essentially then are desiring to be able to pass the assessment in order to earn the certification. So that's one way, and that totally makes sense. And what I appreciate about that is they're learning in a very professional way, right? They're kind of learning like what it really is. And especially if it's like a professional Scrum training class, like we really emphasize the why in training. So it's not just like, hey, do this, do this, do this. Like, here's a bunch of practices. It really helps people understand that this is not just a bunch of practices, right? This is a fundamentally different approach because of the complexity, unpredictability, and need to respond to change. And so that's a great way to start, because then you're getting, that baseline level of knowledge is really there. And then especially you can tell when you are looking at job applications, when you're interviewing, when you're just networking and trying to find out what are the companies that are trying to do this well. And note, I say trying to do this well because, it's hard. And that transition, the example you shared actually of like being open to working in hybrid environments, right? I am too, because that might be a need for a period of time, maybe longer, or different circumstances, right? It's not
wall we volunteer to hit our head up against,
Yeah, because that's how change happens, right? Like, if we're really going to be a change agent, the idea is we don't walk into a perfect scenario, like that it's, but again, you get to choose. The second way people come into it is their company is training them. And sometimes it's because they're starting. They're like, hey, we're going to make this transition and we want to set everybody up for success. So we're going to train everybody. Or sometimes they have joined a Scrum team thinking they've been doing Scrum and are somehow now getting training. Maybe it's their own desire to get training because they're like, something feels off. Like, maybe I should go get training. I've never had it before. So there's kind of those two paths. And that path is great too, because then you have this experience of something that you can compare against and say, oh, we haven't been doing that, or we do it this way. And I assumed that was a rule, but it's not a rule. And we might want to change how we do this because it's causing us some struggles. And I didn't realize we could change that, right? So, I kind of love both scenarios when I'm teaching a class, both kind of that introduction, like, hey, this is what it is and how it's different than the way you've probably been working, versus we've been doing Scrum, it's been a struggle, and oh my gosh, now I understand why. And now I understand what is within our power to change and what guides me, right? Being guided by empiricism, being guided by focusing on customer value, being guided by looking for opportunities to improve the flow of value in our processes and identify ways to remove organizational impediments. And so those are kind of like how I see people start that journey. And then I think that it's helpful to have baseline certification, right? Because it demonstrates to, a potential employer. It also demonstrates to you, right, what you actually learned, know, and understand about the foundational level of knowledge. So to speak to that for Scrum.org certifications, right, if you take the PSM1, the PSPO1, and so on, those base level assessments where you earn that certification is really testing that you have a foundational level of knowledge and you've proven it. And so one of the things we talk about a lot at the end of a training class is, hey, take this assessment. You have to get an 85%, which means it actually proves you have learned things. It doesn't necessarily prove that you can apply it on the job. And that's why there are kind of different levels of certification. And not all certifications have the same type of process in terms of their vetting. So, I suggest people get those kind of foundational level, especially if it's Scrum, or maybe like if it's Kanban, that you're working in a Kanban system, whatever that first level certification is. I think it's important to have that early on because, one, it's testing, do I actually know, or are there areas I need to kind of go back to and get support on. But also it is kind of that entryway in at this point to a lot of different jobs in the industry. They are looking for that baseline level.
So I guess as an example, I am a SAFe program consultant. And so I'm certified to teach SAFe. And I actually started with that as my first Agile certification.
Oh, wow.
So I did not know that much about it, and then just initially jumped into it with that certification. It was like drinking from a fire hose, right? Didn't even really know that much about like Agile management, but I sat next to, but it was a training that they wanted me to get for my company. And I sat next to like the leaders of like the Lean Agile Center of Excellence for DirecTV. And so I basically just let them do the class and I just watched them have all these like really big aha moments where like I barely knew enough. And I was talking about this was like a government implementation of Agile. So a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of like different things to consider that I knew nothing about. And so again, it was like drinking from a fire hose, but then like working to like start to apply that and asking a lot of questions back. And then what I ended up doing is later on in my career, I ended up taking like specific courses for roles. And then people were like, why did you take that? I took like the Scrum Master course for Scrum and scrum.org. Mainly because I still had all these questions about how does Scrum specifically do it? Because SAFe incorporates a lot of different things. It's a really huge framework. And so what are some of the assumptions that I had about Scrum that, I maybe isn't actually a part of the framework? What is the intent behind some of the things that Scrum does specifically that might be different? And how do I start to think about things at a bit of a smaller scale when I'm just talking about a Scrum team? So, those are like, I feel like those are the two different options, right, that you kind of ran into. So kind of how do you, giving my example, how do you wish I would have started that certification journey, or any kind of feedback for both of those sides of the equation?
Honestly, I don't think there's anything wrong with your certification journey, right? You kind of like, I think of it as like something presented itself. So it seemed in alignment for you, you went for it, but you actually tried to process the learning. You tried to integrate the learning, and you recognize like, oh, I don't fully understand this, or I don't have a lot of experience. Like conceptually it makes sense, but like how, there's all these complexities, or this is a very different type of environment. And so you recognize that, to actually be great at this, I have a ways to go. And you got that kind of on the job experience, it sounds like, by like, other mentors and other people supporting it. And then you recognize like, you know what, now I'm ready to go back and get like certain pieces, the foundation. And I always find it helpful to get different perspectives on things as well. Like you kind of had a perspective on it that it was like bigger than just Scrum framework. And of course, it's not diving as deep into that then. So then you wanted to say, hey, I want to actually know this. And so it's interesting. To me, I don't think there's anything wrong with the journey, is I guess what I'm saying. Because it was intentional, actually, like you kind of knew why you were going in a direction and then why you went in another direction. Some people might say it's going backwards, but to me, it's not going backwards. It's understanding something at a different maybe depth, or a different perspective, as well. So to me, I wouldn't have suggested you do anything, because it sounds like it was anything different. It sounds like exactly what presented itself and what was needed in the moment. And, I don't know if everybody would agree with me on that. That's my opinion. But I love that you shared that example, because it just shows people that there are many pathways. There isn't one right pathway. If you are starting new and you don't have kind of the opportunity that you're talking about and was presented to you, there are people who publish different recommendations on a path, on a journey. For example, one of the things that scrum.org had been asked for years was like, what is the journey? You offer all these different courses and certifications. Yeah. And it's like, there are some foundational things depending on what your role is and your focus area. But then to me, there's also kind of like, well, maybe you need evidence-based management because you're struggling to get people you're in the organization to understand effective goals and to measure the right thing. Like there's a need. So you go there versus like, here's the 6 courses and certifications you take in order. And one of the things though, that because there has been such a need though, and I do understand that people might be starting from a different baseline, is they have actually published, kind of journeys now that they recommend, but I would say they're also not the only path. There's, know your why, like know what you are, maybe what challenges you're noticing, and then seeking out what is the knowledge, the practices, the experiences that I need that are going to help me start to make progress on this challenge I'm noticing. I think that's
I
kind of
love
the
it.
big thing.
I'm kind of thinking like this is like I'm almost like Kanbaning it, where it's like pull-based training,
Yes.
Does the training pull to your needs? Are you pulling it towards yourself, or
Yep.
are you like forcing yourself to the next step, or is it like you're taking this just to get that next job run?
Yeah.
Does that make sense for you? Are you pulling it towards yourself, or is it getting pushed on you? And
Absolutely. I love that. I love the metaphor and comparing it to a pull-based system. And the thing is, you might have a rough like plan for your future of like, eventually I want to learn these capabilities and do some research around like which courses do I think are going to help me the most? Because there are different places to go for that. There are also places to get training that are not in the Agile universe. That's, I got my coaching training outside the Agile universe. Same with leadership training. But it's that know what your why is, what is the capability you're trying to grow and why. And then that helps you do your research. And it's almost like you have this rough backlog, like you're talking about, but the order can change, right? Like you can have a rough idea, you can base it on maybe like scrum.org has like a journey, that they recommend, and you can be aware of that, but then you get to choose based on, what what is coming up for you and what your needs are and what is calling to you.
Yeah. So I think that kind of is going to my next question, which is like, there are a lot of those different certifications and trainings. Again, not just in Agile. I've taken like leadership training. I took a facilitation class that was like half a day, blew my mind. And it was just like a normal project management facilitation class that like took me to the next level. Like there's so many different certifications and trainings out there. And especially, I'm thinking I want to make sure that we laser focus it, right? There are going to be people who are listening to this podcast who are, potentially either struggling or wanting to get that next job, looking to advance their career, and they don't want to waste time. They don't want to waste money. We give them all the options of like knowing their why and pulling things towards you, but like, how do I know what certification, what company, what trainer will be right for what I'm looking to get out of it to take that next step so it doesn't so I make sure I'm not wasting my time?
Yeah, it is definitely a challenge because the reality is training has become sort of commoditized, whichever word. I think I might have made one up.
Monetized or commercial?
Monetized for sure, but like turned into like a commodity to some degree of like, companies are essentially just selling training and selling certifications now. And so you do need to do some due diligence and kind of know, like, is this a reputable certification I'm going for? So like just to give a couple of examples, and these are not the only examples, they're just the ones I have the most familiarity with. Professional Scrum training is, training that is only done through licensed scrum.org trainers. It uses, consistent materials. They have they have an assessment that you have to pass to actually prove, your level of understanding of the material. There are companies out there that say they're offering something that looks like scrum.org training, and it is not. And so one of the ways, and so this is probably happening for other types of trainings as well, other types of certifications. And so I just encourage people to do your research. Like, can you find humans associated with that company? And also notice, like, if somebody's offering like a training that is so drastically cheap compared to what you're seeing, it might not really be the thing. It might not be legit. Or even if it is legit, that I will always like ask myself questions like, well, so what is the quality of this? Like, so, it's not the only sign, but those are some of the signs I see specifically, in my world of like the types of trainings that I offer that are licensed through scrum.org. There are companies that do have multiple professional Scrum trainers like me that offer, a frequent schedule of training. There are people like me who I work solo. I'm a solopreneur and I occasionally offer public courses. And there's different ways that training can look and be out there. It's just look for like, does this look like a company that actually has experience and works with clients, or are they just doing training? Is kind of another thing I look at as well. So those are just some of the things I look for, because it has become a commodity to some degree, especially kind of certain classes that are really well known, like PSM, PSPO, the Scrum.org baseline kind of level classes that people, that you'll see on job certifications. We're looking for either a CSM or a PSM, and so like everybody's going to go get like one of those, or a PSPO or a CSPO, so those are kind of the most known ones in the industry. And so you just want to look for those signs. I also really personally, especially when I'm seeking to attend a training or seek out a new certification, I am a big fan of word of mouth, like talking to people I know and trust who have been to that training with that instructor to get their experience. I did that with my coaching training that I took through Coactive. I did that through the leadership program I took with Coactive. I did that with ORSC training as well. It was like people I knew who had been through it, asking them questions, and sometimes it is up to who the trainer is. Like with Coactive or ORSC, you don't get to pick whose class you go to. It's all kind of hosted, I think it's still that way. I'll say it was that way when I signed up. But like with if you wanted to take a professional Scrum class, like you're gonna likely know who the instructor is. And while we do have like a baseline of licensing and like consistent courseware and learning objectives that we have to meet, trainers have different styles. And so that could be another question, especially when it comes to the live virtual environment. Some of us have very different needs around how we want to engage, in online environments. That could be true in person as well. So that's another thing to be considering is like, does that matter to you? And then getting some personal experiences from people that who have been to that training or worked with that trainer before.
Yeah, no, that's great. All fantastic advice, all little things that like we could pull apart and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I might add to, as you were talking is like, for example, for SAFE training, you can go onto the SAFE website and look at their gold partners and look at their calendar for their gold partners. If you want to get training at like a reputable, place, and then to your point of like looking them up, are they just a training organization? Is that fine with you? Or do they have coaches? Are the people who are doing the training looking at their latest classes, seeing who's doing a lot of this training? Are those people that you want to learn from? For example, I have a lot of experience in the government space. And so I've specifically gotten chosen to do training for government clients because of that expertise, or in large supply chains, because of that expertise. Yeah. Because, I feel like half the training that you go to is like, yes, learning the content, but then the other half is like getting to hear the stories and the specific information that people will have and around things. So
yeah, that's a great addition.
Figuring out who do you want to learn from, Yep. I've also attended like LinkedIn lives or listened to them for trainers and stuff, because then you get to hear their voice. Because not only I have this funny story, but it was the first time I ever got to teach the Safe for Executives course, and I was so excited. I was pumped. I was ready to go. And I was like, oh my God, we're not. And they had another external coach, or they had an external coach. I was an internal coach. And I went, oh my God, why have you guys chosen me? Is it because of this expertise, or is it because of this thing that I've been doing? Like, or am I potentially like going up in the ranks of like coaching and stuff? And they were like, no, this training is going to be at like, 7, 8 a.m. And you're the only person that we know can keep 12 executives like awake for 4 hours. And I was like,
It's
I'm
a
your
special,
girl. Like,
it's a special skill. It's a superpower.
yeah, I was like, all right, I'm here, so I went like full Emily energy, 120%, like that class. And I've since like kind of taken that approach to the classes. It's like, I know sometimes people are going and they're going to see me because of that energy that I bring to classes and the funny stories and the conversations and stuff like that. So,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. Those are great examples of how you can get to know that person's vibe, their energy, their style. Do they say things that really resonate with you? Yeah, those are great examples as well. The other thing that I was thinking of related to this is, especially if it's about certification, um, why you're taking a training is some certifications require you to pay to keep them. Like for example, the PMP. I have my PMP certification. So like again, not in the Agile Scrum world, giving an example there. And I pay it every 3 years. I think I have to pay it. I don't have to retake a test. Um, but I just have to pay to continue to keep my certification. I do have to I have to like show them professional development units. So I guess like I might have to pay if I'm taking a class to earn PDUs, but typically I'm not having to do that because of the work I do earns me enough PDUs.
yeah,
But if that matters to you, like that's the thing you want to be aware of. Do I have to pay to keep this credential? And factoring that in. I know my why for maintaining it. It's not because I work in project management space anymore. It's because I came from a project management background and I understood why I wanted to work differently. And I'm not anti-project managers or anti-project management. And I know how to have those conversations and help kind of co-create a way forward in organizations. And by maintaining that PMP, it helps give me cred with those organizations. Not just that, there's some writings I've done that like help, people understand that as well. But that's my why. That's not like some big and all like inspiring why, but it is a why. Now there's other like for example in the Agile space in the Scrum space, like for Scrum.org credentials, you earn it, you get to keep it forever. There's no like additional testing. There's no concept of like the the professional development units that PMP does. So know that getting into it as well, because that could factor into your decisions whether or not and what you have to do to maintain it. Now if I had gone down coactive coaching certification, significantly more time investment, significantly more financial investment. And also you have to do things that like to maintain it as well. And it's a more rigorous process because they're not just testing your knowledge. It's a whole different style of certification where you're going through a process where they are validating and like you're proving your capability, which is a very different process. And so, again, just to like bring out a range of different ways that certification can work. And in the Agile space, it tends to be more of the take an assessment, or even sometimes you don't take an assessment at all. You just attend a class and you earn the certification. And, so like, what value does that have to you? What do you have to still maintain it? What does that cost? What is that process? So those are just things you want to be aware of as well.
great. And I think that kind of goes to our final question before I have a tough question for you after this one. So we're ready for it. So great. Now I'm certified, right? Like we've gone through our journey of figuring out our why. We've, understood the pros and cons of different types of trainings. We've figured out a right fit for us. We've taken that training. I've gotten the belt. I've passed the test. Where do I go now? What's kind of that beyond certification look like? What would you expect?
Yeah. So I am a big proponent of what I call intentional practice. So, it's great to earn the credential, and, that can be really important, especially in our industry right now. and not just in the Agile space, just any kind of advancing your career in a field. But the reality is, if you don't actually practice what you're learning, you're not going to be able to demonstrate in an interview that you actually are capable of applying, right? That skill, that knowledge, those practices. And so you want to look for opportunities to practice. And I always say intentional practice too, because it's like that. It's like, I think of it that way, almost like I'm experimenting, like I'm trying a thing. Here's why I'm trying it. I know this isn't going to be perfect, but I'm going to reflect on it and I'm going to learn from it. And then I'm going to like think about, okay, how would I do it differently next time? Or what did I do well? And what pieces of that did I realize I wasn't as prepared for, right? Like that's what I mean by intentional practice, where you're actually giving yourself the space to reflect, to integrate new insights. And then if you can immediately, right, try again, try something else differently or tweak it. But going through that process of intentional practice, and that will start to give you kind of the stories you need to be able to tell when you are thinking about, going to a job interview or just you're networking with people, right? That you want them to know that you have certain experiences and you're
I took that training and like, I don't know, I'm not doing that job. I'm not doing the thing. So like, I'll just wait until I get the opportunity to make a Kanban board. It's like, no, make a Kanban board. Do it.
Yeah. Hey, plan your family vacation using a Kanban, using Kanban, or, thinking about those new value practices you learned. Think about, well, if I were to decide where I focus my time in my life, how would I use these value practices in my everyday? Like there are so many ways that we can practice, even if we don't have a job right now. Maybe it's with your family, maybe it's with a community group that you're a part of. It could be a group of friends even. Maybe don't tell them what you're doing because they might go like, Kanban, what are you talking about? But like find ways that you can even talk about the things you've learned using everyday language that's relatable to people.
I still do it with my friends, like I'll do a dot voting exercise with my friends and they're like, what are you doing? And I was like, we're planning a vacation. And
I love it.
Hello, I'm a facilitator in my life, so we're going to do a dot voting thing. And they're like, okay. But then they do it and they're like, that was cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you get paid to do this thing.
That's such a great example. The other thing to think about too is like, you can leverage like sort of pieces of skills that you're learning, like especially if you think about like my facilitation skills, my coaching skills. I'm not saying try to coach somebody that has not given you consent, but there's a lot we learn around coaching skills that is beyond just like I am a formal coach in this relationship. It's listening, like how we listen, how we ask questions differently. So there's all these little ways that we can practice in our day to day without being like, I am taking this whole class and applying it, or this whole practice or framework and applying it. There's so many opportunities. So yeah, we got to find those. I love, like, you're traveling, I assume, with Sharpies and sticky notes, to be, ready at any point.
I do have like a box. Where's the box? The mirrored thing. That's the box. That's the box of sticky notes and markers that I would carry around as my RTE box, my Release Train Engineer box, for those who don't know.
I love it. Yeah.
So tough question.
Yeah.
If you're ready.
Yep.
So I just want to make sure we can get through all the topics in under an hour. But so we were talking about it earlier as we started, discussing the episode, and this is something that we continue to get as representatives of Agile careers, and then being, a Scrum trainer and a consultant yourself. It's like we have people who are in the industry right now and maybe people who are watching that are, either trying to get that next job, or they're currently in between gigs, and they want to, and I was talking about not wasting their money and things like that. But I think we can experience the opposite side, where people come into a training and they go, I'm in this training so I can get a job. Help me get a job. What's the next step? How do I get that job? And it can be, we recognize how difficult it can be for us to be like, well, we're just trying to teach you the information and the knowledge and give you the intent, because we don't want you to be a coach just to be a coach and make a lot of money. We want you to be a coach because we actually believe in this framework, and we want to
have you guys see the benefit. So what advice would you give to those who are either thinking about taking training or certification to get that next job, or kind of feel that pressure, that pull themselves?
Yeah. Yeah, I completely understand kind of that, the difficulty of being in that situation. And what I tend to offer people is, first of all, if you don't have experience in the role you're looking for, right, on your resume, it is going to be more challenging, right? Because a lot of times people are hiring, they want experience, right? Even if it's just a year or two, because they're hiring at, an entry level of that position, they're still looking for some sort of experience. And so one of the things I encourage people to do is to look within their current organization, if they are in a current organization, for an opportunity, to get that first opportunity, because your current organization, right, like they know you, right, like they know these other skills and capabilities that you have that are very applicable, right, transferable skills. And so I think if you are in a current organization and maybe you don't have the opportunity to work in an agile way, try to find that opportunity within the organization. Now, if that's not an option, you still have that ability to speak to your transferable skills. So, like thinking back to previous experiences. And so, when you do go to interviews, or the way you even like fill out a job application, or the way you word things on a or on your resume or your LinkedIn profile, right? I'm not saying make things up, but you can change how you speak about your experiences to focus on the skills that you want to be applying, in your next job. So that idea of understanding, and by the way, that requires you having a deep understanding of what you're learning, right? And so that to some degree, there's an intentional practice already happening there by you reflecting on past experiences, and thinking about like, oh, I actually was doing this or something very similar without knowing it. I worked on this train wreck of a project once, and I totally understand like why this failed now, or here's how I would approach it differently. And so even being able to like have those stories to talk about, like, here's my experience and here's why I want to do it this way and here's what I would have done differently. That is still showing that you have the ability, to apply the knowledge, and to think on your feet. The other piece that I encourage people to do is to network, and just get to know more people who are working in different types of organizations. Like, a lot of times we think of like the really big companies because they're the ones we hear about. But there's a lot of small companies that are probably a little, maybe even more willing to give somebody their first shot, or it's more going to be based on a conversation they had with you at a meetup that gets you in the door to have that interview with the right person versus, the big screening that happens with resumes to try to get yourself, in that door. So those are a few things that come to mind for me. If there's anything else you would add.
That's really resonating with me, and I love I've definitely heard people before like talk about projects that they've worked on, like maybe they're transitioning from a project coordinator, project manager position to a Scrum Master, and they're like, yeah, I took this training, or and I'm looking to go into a Scrum Master role, and I could see how in this project, like when we were doing this, we were doing X, and it would have really helped if we've done like backlog refinement, and that's why like scope creep happened in all of my different projects, and now I know that's not a bad thing. And that, yeah, to your point of like that brings in the intent. Like it's not just like, can you make a Kanban board? It's like, why would you? How are you going to take like the everyday things that or the everyday activities, work that are in an organization, and how would you then apply the things that you've learned? So I love that, going back and then, taking things a little bit into a different context. Like, I used a Kanban board for construction at one point in time. I helped one of my friends do that. And you don't have to be like, oh yeah, I helped my friend like create a, Kanban board, which you can be like, yeah, I was working with this construction crew and it looked like they were struggling in this way. Like they weren't able to really see, the changes come in. And it was like this running like Google Doc. And I was like, hey, I think there's a better way. to do this. And that shows the intent. That brings a good story, but it's also not on the job, right? Like there's ways to frame it.
Yeah, and taking that example, and expanding it even further, right? Do you volunteer with a nonprofit? Are you part of, I don't know, like a school PTA kind of thing, right? Like, what you might have opportunities to apply, some of this stuff where you really can speak to like, I wasn't paid to do this necessarily, but I did it. And I love that you gave that example of you can talk about it this way or you can talk about it this way, right? And like they're both truths, and how we talk about our experiences does matter.
Does matter, yeah. So this is great. I want to make sure we got to all the points and we got to the tough question, and that was awesome. I'm really excited for people to like review this and kind of go through it and then kind of transition this into like the how to get interviewed, as an Agilist, to kind of take from that. So what are you doing for your own professional growth? And you've already listed out quite a few things. So maybe like top 3 things that you're doing right now.
Ooh, that is a juicy question.
Yeah, so you do a lot.
So I mentioned at the start that I'm really leaning in to leadership work, and I have been for years. And one of the ways I like integrate deeper is I create the thing, and I start doing it out in the world. And there's a number of ways I've been doing that already. I've been running these kind of inner leader tools, mini workshops with somebody I co-lead with. But the thing I'm most excited about is I'm running a 1-week transformational leadership experience called Agile Leadership Surf Camp. And so it's like the last several years, I realized that I was processing my leadership work in the ocean. And processing, like, this is just like agility. Like, this is all like, it's this like
it's all
very
connected, man.
like it's this super embodied experience that like really shines a light on like, oh, wow, I do still see where I get upset and reactive and like blame the ocean for like the waves not being good today. Like that's just a really simple example, but it's like, it's real. And like understanding emergence.
Can't control the ocean.
Yeah, like, but it's like crazy how we do it. It's like, that doesn't make sense, but oh my gosh, I'm doing it. And wait, how am I doing this out of the ocean too? And what is the impact that's having on me? So I'm super excited about that. And so it's kind of like have a pilot coming up and running another one in 2025. And yeah, so I'm really leaning into also co-leading. And so pulling in, so it's like all leadership, but like deepening the leadership and like understanding how do you co-lead better and how do you co-create and how do you bring more embodied practices into learning as well? Because that's, I've had some opportunity to experience some embodied learning and understanding like, oh, wow, like how that is a very different approach that has like huge benefits in terms of like truly helping us kind of break patterns and habits and like step into the thing that we've been trying to do for, like however many years. So it's kind of like all in the leadership realm. But those are kind of the key things that I've been leaning into a lot.
Great. And what final wisdom would you like to share with our listeners based on all the different things that we talked about? What's some final wisdom to take away?
I think in the context of what we've talked about today, I guess the big thing I want people to know is like, just trust yourself, like trust your gut. And try, like, be aware of what's happening, but don't get kind of sucked into the comparison of it. Like, get clear on what's important to you and follow whatever path emerges. You'll figure it out.
Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode of Women in Agile, Aspire and Achieve in Your Agile Career podcast series. It's brought to you in partnership with the Women in Agile nonprofit, Scrum.org, and Agile Careers nonprofit. We hope you've learned something new and invite you to tell a friend or coworker about the podcast.
So please go online to womeninagile.org to learn more about our initiative and find more inspiring podcast conversations. Thank you so much again, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Agilists, Aspire and Achieve in Your Career. We hope you found inspiration and practical tips to elevate your Agile journey. Remember, growth doesn't happen alone, so consider exploring the Women in Agile Mentorship Program and/or follow the Agile Careers MPO on LinkedIn to see more content geared towards advancing your careers. A huge thank you to our amazing sponsors, Scrum.org, for their continued support in empowering Agile professionals and creating opportunities for career advancement. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know what topics you'd love to see next. Keep aspiring, keep achieving, and continue thriving in your career.